Hey, everybody, this is Thomas, and this is Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. So, today, guys, we're going to have a beautiful interview. We're going to have a good conversation. We're going to talk about psychology, which is the best stuff. Let's go ahead and get Elizabeth to introduce herself here.
Well, hi, I'm Elizabeth Loftus. Anything else you want to know?
You know what? I got this covered for you, Elizabeth.
Okay, good.
Elizabeth is an American cognitive psychologist known for her groundbreaking research on the malleability and fallibility of human memory. So we're going to talk about things like the misinformation effect, the reliability of eyewitness testimony, anecdotal testimony, the ideas of recovered memories and how people remember things. She has also been involved with the criminal justice system, I do believe. Is that correct, Elizabeth?
Well, more than criminal, even civil,
Yeah,
other kinds of legal
yeah,
issues.
yeah. Yeah, so everything she's had her hands in all kinds of cookie jars that deals with this kind of stuff. So it's excellent. Um, well, let's go ahead and first just talk about right now. This is what I usually ask guests when they come on. But right now, what are you working on? What do you love? What are you into? What is
Well, right now it's the summer, so I'm mostly starting to get ready for the academic year to gear up and starting to get ready to teach a graduate seminar called Memory and the Law,
Ooh,
and just trying to wrap things up for various projects I've been working on. A couple of research collaborations and
any
just
of
trying to
those
get
stick
ready
out
for
to you?
the new year to start, new academic year.
Yeah. So that's good. That's a new academic year is always good. Any of those research projects stick out for you? Anything that you learned most recently on any of them that interested you?
Well, I don't want to tell you yet because I don't want,
Uh,
any subjects who might be listening, we cannot tell them the
right,
hypothesis. We have to disguise it. So
right, right.
I think I'd rather talk about some things that are
Okay.
recently published or already
Sure.
done and ready to submit.
There's a good question. Have you read a good paper recently, a good journal or a good journal article that has been in the realm of cognitive psychology that you thought was just amazing?
Um, there. Well, I recently read an interesting paper on a new method for planting false memories into the minds of people. I've been planting false memories or trying to distort people's memories for a long time, and some of the methods that we have come up with are kind of tedious and time consuming, expensive, take a
Mhm.
lot of time, and so on. But there's a new method in a paper published by some Dutch researchers. I think, you know, within the last year or so. I forget
Right.
the exact publication date. Anyhow, essentially, you ask people some questions about their past, their childhood, uh, or even their more recent past, and then you tell them that they told you things that they didn't really tell you. So you tell them, for example, that they told you that there was a time when they were a kid when they went swimming and their swimming outfit fell off, their trunks fell off.
Mm.
Now, they never really said that happened. In fact, they said it didn't happen, but you tell them that they had previously told you it did, and this is a new kind of easier, efficient way to get some people to now remember something that they've previously denied.
Wow. That has implications in a lot of things.
It does.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
being
does.
able to do that. So we're going to do a little class for people here. Can you tell me about the misinformation effect?
Sure. The misinformation effect is this. After people see some event, in my work, it's a simulated crime or a simulated accident, some legally relevant event, but it could be any event. Sometimes people are exposed to some misleading or erroneous information about the event, And that erroneous information, that misinformation, can negatively affect their memory. People will absorb the misinformation, adopt it as their own memory, and therefore they'll make memory errors. And
Hmm.
that is the misinformation effect, the reduced memory that is a result of exposure to post event misinformation.
Post-event misinformation. Okay. See, that's interesting to me that the brain works like that. I mean, how does that work at the neuroscientific level, like in the hippocampus? How does that?
Well, you're going to have to ask a neuroscientist who really knows something about the hippocampus and the rest of the brain structure. And I know you'll be able to find some people
Oh, we will.
who study memory at that level. But
Yeah.
my work is behavioral, so I'm
Okay.
looking at what people say and what they think and how they feel.
Right.
But I'm not, unless I'm collaborating with an expert studying the neuroimaging of memory processes.
Mm. So I imagine you have done that before, I'm sure. But
With others who are experts in that area, but not
I
by
didn't know that you were.
myself.
I didn't know that you were just strictly behavioral. I would have kept my questions to that to that lens. So this is what I talk about with a lot of people when it comes to just logical reasoning and good evidence for things.
Mhm.
You talk about eyewitness testimony, right? You cover that a good bit.
Mhm.
We know that anecdotal testimony is the least viable source of evidence, basically in the world. Would you agree with that?
Well, it depends on the conditions. Sometimes eyewitness testimony can be very accurate, and sometimes that's all you have. And
Yeah,
so we're not getting rid of it.
sure.
We're just
So,
needing to figure out how to make it better.
yeah, and it says here that it can, it's highly susceptible to suggestion, right? So, in law, I guess that could lead to like potential incorrect identifications and false accusations, right?
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you only have to look at, for example, the Innocence Project in New York that
Yes.
has gathered data on, something like more than 350 people who've been wrongfully convicted of crimes that they didn't do. And DNA eventually revealed they were actually innocent.
Yeah.
And when those cases have been examined, the number one cause of those mistakes is faulty human memory.
Yeah. And eyewitness testimony in certain cases in court is taken very highly, I would imagine, especially if it's like by a law official. Eyewitness testimony is even more important, I would imagine.
People tend to believe an eyewitness, especially if they deliver their account with a lot of detail and with a lot of confidence and with some
Right.
emotion. It's
Right.
very hard for people listening to it to resist and remain skeptical about it.
Yeah, their biases are going to affect their decisions on that. So, um, What about recovered memories? What's how can I idealize that concept so that memories may be
Well,
false and implanted by I guess therapeutic techniques maybe.
well, that's okay. And what I like to. It became, let's say, in the early '90s, um, popular to make a claim that people had all this horrible trauma and had repressed this trauma into the unconscious. And now some of these individuals were claiming they'd recovered these repressed memories. And when we started to look for evidence that you, for example, could be traumatized brutally for 10 years and be completely unaware of it until the recovery of these repressed memories, there surprisingly was very little, if any, credible scientific support for this.
Yeah.
And when you say recovered memory, well, that's kind of an umbrella term. It can mean this repressed memory thing for which there is no evidence, but it can also mean you haven't thought about something for a long time and then were reminded of it. And that, of course, happens.
Yeah.
So people do not think about things for a long time, and they get reminded and then they remember them.
Yeah.
And that is ordinary forgetting and remembering, but that's not what is being claimed in the many, many zillions of cases where this issue was brought up in litigation.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So I can't remember, just off of the cuff. I can't really remember many of my memories before the age of 5. I really can't. Is that different for you? Do you remember that far back?
Well, like what you're getting at here is childhood amnesia, which, so you're normal. I just want to tell you, you're normal. We don't have concrete, reliable memories for things that happened to us in the first few years of life.
Yeah.
So when is the offset of childhood amnesia? You know, most psychologists would put that at about age 3. But some people don't have an earliest memory until, for something that happened, you know, until maybe their earliest memory is age 5 or even age 7.
Yeah.
And that is childhood amnesia, sort of a well-established phenomenon in the psychological literature.
Yeah. Does that have anything I had read that, like, you know, children's intelligence and their personality kind of crystallizes around 7 or 8? Is that correct?
Well, you'll want to talk to a developmental psychologist about that, somebody who studies that age group. But
I keep on going.
You know, you asked me about my earliest memory. I mean, for years, I thought my earliest memory was when I was about 5 or so. And it was a pleasant, wonderful memory. It was a day I went to see The Greatest Show on Earth and had a terrific time as a kid. And one day, you know, all grown up and a memory scientist, I was in a bookstore and there was a book on, you know, the history of movies. And I decided to look up The Greatest Show on Earth. And it wasn't released until I was 8. And I thought, oh my God, my whole life I've thought that was my earliest memory, age 5, but it isn't my earliest memories, because I do have some that, you know, are age 5 or 6 or earlier than 8.
Yeah. Have you a lot of your students, do they all have the childhood amnesia thing going on, and whenever they talk to you about that kind of stuff?
They do, sure. Well, yeah, we like talking about memory, you know, issues.
Right.
In my classes, in my laboratory.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever met any that were very could remember all the way back to, like, I don't know, age 2 or age 1?
If somebody tells me they remember something from when they were 1, I seriously doubt it's a real memory. It might be a true experience that they learned about later or saw a photograph later, but I doubt it really is an episodic memory.
Oh, I'd have to agree. I just thought, what's the craziest thing you've heard from students that?
Well,
2 years old.
Sometimes people think they have, you know, past life memories or memories of being in the womb. And
have you done studies on the memories being in the womb kind of thing? Because I don't know too much about that.
Well, I actually wrote an essay with one of my favorite collaborators about why we shouldn't believe these memories. And this particular collaborator, her name is Marianne Gary. She teaches in New Zealand. And she wrote the title for our essay on these supposed memories. And the title is Womb with a View. Womb with a View. But no, I mean, people have all kinds of strange memories. You know, I haven't studied those individuals, but I've certainly read a lot about them, or the ones who believe they were abducted by aliens, taken up on spaceships, and sexually experimented upon, and returned to their beds on Earth. We got all kinds of
we do.
Unusual things that people think they remember about their past.
And I know you know that A&E show to where they have the children who have past lives. You ever seen that show?
I don't know if I've seen exactly that show, but
it's on A&E or some network show. It's basically about children who remember past lives or supposedly remember past lives. You know, the show would show like psychologists saying, they shouldn't know this about this person, and there's no way they, I don't know if there's any truth to that whatsoever. And I wouldn't say that there is, but it's just very interesting to me that those kind of, I guess, weird happenstances can be that way. It's weird to me.
Well, that'd be another interesting person for you to have on the show, which is somebody who studies that, or somebody like Richard McNally from Harvard, who has studied people who remember being abducted by aliens.
Richard McNally. Okay, I'll remember that.
Well, Rich McNally, he's a fantastic psychologist.
Okay, Richard McNally. I'm gonna be inviting him then. So let's what else?
Maybe he can bring one of his subjects with him, and you can talk
Honestly,
to the subject.
I would like to talk to someone who thinks that's life. I would just
Rich studies the alien abduction memories.
Oh, the alien abductions.
Yeah, not the past. Not the past life ones, but
okay. So he just specifically studies the alien stuff, like.
Well, he does other things as well. I mean, but that's just one line of work that he's pursued.
That would be very interesting as a job to me. I think that would be one of the coolest jobs in psychology to have, is analyzing people's alien abduction stories.
Yeah, and get paid for it.
And get paid for it, yeah. So let me ask, I guess we'll start asking some of the questions I had written down. What initially sparked your interest in psychology? What was it that really made you want to study memory and stuff like that?
Well, first it was I'll start with college. I was a math major at UCLA, and I was did well in math at high school. I loved algebra. I loved geometry. I loved trigonometry. When I got to UCLA and I started taking calculus, I wasn't that thrilled with calculus, but I wasn't going to give up on math. I'd invested too much time in it, and so I was sticking with it. But I took an elective. You have to take electives as an undergraduate, and I took introductory psychology, and I just absolutely loved it. So I took some more psychology. And then pretty soon I had enough credits in psychology for a double major. So there I was going to graduate with a degree majoring in mathematics and psychology. And I wanted to go to grad school. And one of my professors said, well, there's a program at Stanford called mathematical psychology where you could get your PhD. And I thought, that's perfect for me. It combines the two fields. I went to Stanford, and it turns out I wasn't that crazy about mathematical psychology, and but I did take a class from a professor who was studying memory, and I started to do some work with that professor on memory and different kind of memory. But that's what got me interested in the study of memory. It was a very different kind of memory, and I really didn't do the kind of work that I do now, memory for crimes, accidents, other legal events, until I was out of graduate school for a few years.
So that was it. It just basically was kind of like flowing from one thing to the next, and you realized mathematical psychology is not for me. Can you tell us about mathematical psychology a bit?
There are so many great experts in mathematical psychology, but basically,
just in general,
it's using mathematics to try to make predictions about behavior. But
Gotcha.
Often, in order to make the mathematics work, you have to make assumptions about the behavior that didn't seem to me to be really appropriate assumptions about behavior sometimes. And anyhow, it was pretty theoretical, and a lot of important people did a lot of important studies in it, but it just didn't turn me on the way I would eventually become excited about the study of eyewitness memory.
Yeah. It seems like the mathematical psychology was a bit too quantitative, where it was trying to make a quantitative thing for a qualitative thing in real life, a behavior, That's weird to me. I would have to. I'm gonna have to look into
You
mathematical.
look into mathematical psychology, and I can recommend some super experts in that field that you
Okay.
might want to talk to and learn a little bit more
Oh,
about it.
please! If you could make a list for us and get we could get that. That would be amazing because I'm always looking for new guests, especially in the psychology field because that's my main interest. Do you want to talk more about how eyewitness testimony, or can you tell us about a case that you did maybe that's okay to talk about that you had something that you struggled with?
Well, well, first of all, there I was. I wanted to study eyewitness memory. I
Hmm.
wanted to study it because I wanted to look at something that I thought would have practical applicability. I was designing studies of eyewitness memory using films of. I started off with films of accidents, and eventually, uh, well, I'm sorry. You're showing me a picture of myself rather than you, and so it's funny for me to be talking to myself. Do you know what I mean? It's
I
better
do.
if I talk to you. It feels a little more natural
Yeah.
than talking to myself. Okay, you're back. Good. So, at some point I thought, I've seen these laboratory witnesses. I can see how they make mistakes, and I can make them make mistakes. But I haven't seen real witnesses in real cases. So at some point, I knew I had moved at that point to the University of Washington to start to teach. And I knew a family friend was one of the lead attorneys in the public defender's office in the city there. So I said to him, look, I know something about eyewitness testimony. I've been studying it for a few years. I'd like to see real witnesses in action. How about if I consult on a case of yours for free and see if there's anything from the science that might be helpful for you?
Hmm.
And you let me hang out with you, watch you interview witnesses, and I see real witnesses in an actual real world setting. So that's what I did. I worked with him on a murder case where
Oh.
a woman was the defendant. She was accused of killing her boyfriend, and her defense was self defense.
Ooh.
To make a long story short, because I don't want to go into the whole detail of the
That's
case,
okay.
but uh, there were scientific memory issues in this case. Um, the woman was found not guilty. And I wrote an article for Psychology Today magazine. I wrote about the case. I wrote about the not guilty verdict. I wrote about the science that was relevant in this case that we felt helped support the self defense not guilty verdict.
Yeah.
And after that article came out, back in the 70s, Psych Today was really popular,
Yeah.
not just among people who were studying psychology or teaching it, where it was popular, but also in the legal field. Many lawyers and judges read psychology. It had something like a circulation of 1 million. And
Yeah.
so I started getting calls from lawyers saying, um, would
Come
you
help
help
us.
me with my case?
Yeah.
Would you come to my group of lawyers and lecture about this, the
Yeah.
role of this kind of science? And so
Mm.
that really is how I went from just being an academic research psychologist in the university, teaching and doing research, to having now one big foot in the legal field. It was
Yeah.
through that article.
That's awesome. Psychology Today, I visit it all the time online. I love it.
Yeah,
Um,
I haven't read it much lately, but in the back then
it
it
was the real deal.
was uh, it was great.
Yeah. Well, everything in terms of magazines and publishings and all that was king back then. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have all these uh, individual tens of thousands of webzines. You know what I mean? Uh,
Yes.
so in some of these cases, you would have to teach people, right, of how to like know whether or not people were giving correct memories. Is that even a good question?
Well, a better way to say it would be: Are I don't, or a memory scientist, whatever, does not say whether the person is accurate or inaccurate. But you can analyze the situation and say, there are some factors in this situation that are known from the literature to create difficulties for accurate testimony.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's inaccurate here, but the presence of multiple problematic factors means we got to stop and think, is this accurate or not? And so
Mhm.
what might that look like? Or what would those factors be? Well, one big one is it a cross-racial identification? Do you have a member of one race trying to identify a stranger of a different race? Because there are now scores of studies that show that we make more mistakes when we try to identify a stranger of a different race compared to our own race.
Mm.
Not everybody knows that that's true. You've heard the expression "they all look alike," but many people think that that's not true, or they think that's only true of prejudiced people. But in fact, it's true of people in general, as a general principle, and it's even true of children.
Yeah.
By the time they're about 6 years old, they make more mistakes when they try to identify a stranger of a different race than their own. So that would be an example of a factor, and it might be one of, let's say 4 or 5 factors in the situation that are known to create extra difficulty for an accurate identification, and that's what the memory scientists can talk about.
Okay. So, I mean, we can definitely talk more about that. Trying to think of a good question because my questions are sometimes ill-formed, and I apologize for that.
Well, I'll help revise them for you.
Thank you, thank you. So do you ever have to like go in and speak with actual on the beat cops or anything like that, to where you have to train people to recognize certain types of testimony as more believable or not?
That's something separate that I do.
Yeah.
I've been brought in by the FBI, the Secret Service, the CIA, to talk to law enforcement about how to interview witnesses, about the science of memory, in order to provide them with information so that they can just maximize their ability to get accurate and complete information from the sources that you're trying to get information from.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for decades.
Oh, wow.
When it comes to actual cases, I don't usually interview the people.
Yeah.
I rarely, not never, but rarely interview the actual people, because I've got so many documents but that inform me about what happened and what statements people made, how those statements changed over the course of time. Thomas,
okay.
My phone is ringing and I don't know. I can't stop it, but
it's okay.
Are you
Nobody's
sure?
gonna worry about it.
I could take a peek and see who it is.
Take a peek. You're fine.
Oh, it's one of my former students. I'll just tell her I'm live. Hang on.
You're fine.
Sure. Oh, she hung up. That's okay.
Elizabeth, you're fine. You're completely fine.
Okay.
This is
right,
an informal, just fun conversation.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I hope you're having fun.
I don't know how to turn off my phone here, so sorry for that.
No, don't apologize. Don't worry about it. I'm having fun. This is very fun for me because I'm learning a lot. So when you're studying, you don't study people, you study the effects of behaviors and how that deals with memory, right? You're not going to study a person and say, is this person misremembering something like specifically that I can hone in on? You're not doing that, right?
Well, not in a case, but I study people in my experiments and report the results of what did the subject, witnesses who were part of the study, how did they behave? What did they say? What did they remember? What did they believe? What are they willing to swear to? And so when I say I study behavior, that That's what I mean. I'm studying basically their verbal behavior.
Yeah. Well, what can the verbal behavior definitely tell you about the memory? Like after a time speaking with them, does it? Are there certain phrases or things that let you know, hey, this person may not be remembering this properly?
Yeah, well, when they remember that the wrong guy committed the crime,
That
and
exactly.
because I know what the truth is, I've shown them the simulated crime.
Mm,
And when they pick the wrong guy, I know they made a mistake. Or when they tell me he had a brown jacket when it was clearly green,
yeah.
I know they made a mistake. And sometimes I can make them make that mistake.
I imagine you've seen a lot of people on the stand have terrible memory problems because they're under oath and they're scared. That can probably change how the memory is malleable too, right? And how much stress somebody is under. Or
Yeah, stress, is not particularly good for memory, high extreme stress. But by the time somebody gets on the stand, they're often very rehearsed.
ah,
They've been prepared. They've kind of memorized what they're going to say, and they're sticking to it.
mm,
And so that makes them a little bit harder to cross-examine because they're more fluent, and maybe a little more influential
yeah.
to a jury than they would have been had they not been so rehearsed.
Sometimes I guess that pure rehearsal can turn people off.
Well, if they sound too rote and
Yeah.
insincere, yes.
Yeah. Exactly. So,
But they can be trained not to do that too.
yeah, they can. So,
Yeah.
what is it about implanting false memories? Is that like I know other people. You we. I'm sorry, I'm getting tongue tied here. We started talking about how could you implant someone with a memory? Could you do that?
Well, I've been doing for decades. Yes,
Give
I
me
mean,
give me
if for the and
a
for in many of the studies, we we would take people who actually saw some event and change their memory for the detail of an event. So we've made people who saw a car go through a stop sign believe it was a yield sign. Made people believe that the bad guy who was wearing a green jacket was instead wearing a brown jacket. It's relatively easy to change somebody's memory for the details of an event that they actually saw.
right.
But in the 90s, we devised a method to plant entirely false memories in the minds of people. We
That's
made
kind of what I'm
people,
getting at. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, our initial study there planted a false memory that when you were 5 or 6 years old, you were lost in a shopping mall, that you were frightened and crying and ultimately rescued by an elderly person reunited with the family. And we planted that very rich false memory in about a quarter of ordinary healthy adults, planted that either partially or completely. Then other scientists came along and planted even more bizarre and unusual false memories in the minds of people, like you nearly drowned as a kid and had to be rescued by a lifeguard, or you were attacked by a vicious animal.
Wow.
There are a whole lot of studies out there now where ordinary people have been led to create these really richly detailed false memories. And
Wow.
it's a fascinating phenomenon to see this, to see how you can sort of plant a seed of suggestion and it grows into something so big.
Could that give somebody PTSD, like a placebo PTSD?
Um, well, in our studies, we debrief people, at the end of the study. So
Right,
we have
right.
not given anybody PTSD, but
Not you.
but I do believe, that, and I published one paper on using some crime victim compensation data from the state of Washington, where people who had been led to believe that they were by through suggestive psychotherapy that they were molested in satanic rituals do
Whoa.
end up being severely harmed.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Oh man, it just blows my mind that the memory is so malleable and fallible, like we said earlier, that memories can be implanted like that. And I mean, you could really harm someone's life if if those kind of skills were used in the wrong way.
Well, and it's happened, and there have been hundreds of these patients who went through this suggestive psychotherapy and were led to develop these extreme trauma memories, and maybe they accused their parents, maybe they got their family members prosecuted,
Yeah.
maybe they sued them civilly, and they now have come to realize their memories are false. And many of those patients have now turned around and sued their therapists for planting false memories. That's a whole collection of lawsuits.
Wow.
And they were much more common in the 90s.
Yeah,
When these
psychotherapy's come a long way in the last 30 years. I know that.
Well, there's really good psychotherapy, but then there's this
Yes.
problematic psychotherapy that can be dangerous
That can implant those false memories, right?
and has.
And has. Yeah, I'm actually, what's being done on me right now is REBT. I know you're familiar with that, right? Albert
Wait,
Ellis.
what is that?
Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy.
Oh, okay. So what does that mean for you?
Well, the way that they're treating me is, once he told me that's what he was using, I looked it up and I studied Albert Ellis and how he started as a marriage counselor and how he added what was Stoicism. He used Stoicism from the ancient Greeks and their ideas of changing thoughts to change feelings to change behaviors, almost like the CBT model.
Yes.
And REBT is like one of the progenitors of CBT, one of the first types. And it works pretty well for me because I understand like the ABCD actions, changing thoughts, changing feelings. But the Stoicism is what helps the most. I actually knew quite a bit about that before I even started going to therapy about 6 years ago.
And so, how do you measure that you're better? I'm just curious, not being a clinician.
No, you can be a clinician all you want to. I enjoy answering these questions because I want to let everybody know you're not alone out there if you're suffering. Bipolar it's neurodegenerative, so it's mostly treated with medication. So I'm on 2 antipsychotics and an SSRI, and it seems to be working very well. Now my psychotherapy helps, but when you know what's going on in the psychotherapy and you can walk yourself through it, it's almost like I don't even know if I need to speak to someone about this anymore. So
yeah. Well, do you miss those highs in the high low?
Oh, so much. Oh, everybody says that too.
That's what people say. Yeah.
Everybody. Yeah.
But you don't miss the lows.
No, well, I don't miss the super highs. The super highs.
You don't miss the super highs either.
No, they put me into super anxious psychosis. Just crazy. I'm a type 1 manic, so yeah, anybody out there who's listening, you're not alone. If you've got bipolar, there's places online like betterhelp.com. I'm sure even Elizabeth knows some places online that might be some good places if anybody's having trouble.
Well, the American Psychological Association can make some recommendations, or the psych associations in every state. So
yeah. Anybody listening, please know you're not alone. But so. Let's get back to a topic. I already asked that question. Let's see. I already asked this one, but I'm going to ask it again. What are the key factors that make eyewitness testimony so susceptible to errors and misinformation?
Well, I mentioned one earlier, then that are you dealing with a cross-racial identification? But there are others. So there's some obvious things at the time of the event. How good is the lighting? How far away is the person? Those are kind of fairly obvious. What kind of influence, is your person under the influence of alcohol or marijuana or Valium or other kinds of substances that might affect the formation of new memories? And then how much time passed between the event and somebody's attempt to recall what happened or to make an identification? And, you don't need a PhD to know that memories fade over time. And as time passes, the memory might weaken. What's less a matter of common sense is as that memory is weakening, it becomes more and more vulnerable to contamination or to
Yes.
post-event suggestion that can change the
Would it be
memory.
right to say that time kind of attenuates or pixelates it a little bit? You know, where it gets fuzzier and fuzzier, kind of thing.
Well, it's certainly the memory is weakened and becomes more vulnerable.
Yeah.
And then there are all kinds of factors that come into play at the time that somebody is being tested or questioned about their memory. That are leading questions being used.
Leading
Is it
questions.
a fair test?
Yeah. That's important for everybody listening. Leading questions will happen a lot if you're in the criminal justice system. So,
well, yeah, and it's not just leading questions.
yeah, there's.
I mean, I don't know if you're aware that it's, in our society here in the U.S., it's okay for the police to lie to people.
It is
when they're interviewing them. So it's okay for them to, when they're interviewing a suspect, to say somebody saw you do it, or your fingerprints were found at the scene, or we found your DNA, when it isn't true.
Yeah.
And they do that because they think this is a way to get a confession out of somebody, but it's also a way to plant a false memory.
It is. And what they're looking for in those interrogations, of course, is the evidence to seal the deal, the confession or whatever it may be. Did you ever watch that? Do you remember Elizabeth Smart? She was
was she kidnapped in
yes.
Was it Utah or something?
Yes. And
okay.
They took that man into interrogation, and the interrogation is on YouTube, and I watched that whole thing, and it's so impressive to see how people can delude themselves in their own memories about what he thought happened. It was just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I got a call there, and I had to cut him off.
Oh, why? Aren't we going to take a caller? Or was he
rude? From my phone, and I had to cut him off because there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The show was going on. Well, let's see. I want to go back to more of the key factors here. We got sidetracked there. Let's see. Okay, here's a good one. I wrote this down earlier. How would you respond to critics who argue that memory research might discourage people from trusting their own memories?
I would say it might be a good thing for people to occasionally distrust their own memories.
I agree.
Not a bad thing. I think if people are uncritically accepting every claim that somebody makes to you as if it's a true memory, it is not good for anybody. And I think just being in touch with the fact that we ourselves can make mistakes, and we're human, and it's normal, and you don't have to feel bad about it. And when two people are disagreeing, it's not always clear which one is right and which one is wrong, or they could both be wrong.
That's true.
And so I think a little distrust is what we need, rather than uncritical acceptance.
Some skepticism, right? Some good skepticism. I agree with you. So, I forgot my question. That was going to be a good one too. Well, dang it. Anyway, let me go back to my notes, because I had some good ones. Let's see. Nope. Can you elaborate the conversation surrounding? See, I had come across the recovered memories thing, and that was why I asked such a vague question about it earlier.
That wasn't vague. You just said, what is recovered memory or something, and that allowed me to elaborate. So that was perfect.
Yeah, and then we covered a little bit more of that by saying that, false memories may be implanted by suggestive therapeutic techniques, by actual psychotherapists who do this to people, Let's see, what else? I've got so many good questions, but we've already covered so much of it. We've had such a good conversation. Let's see. What do you think? How about this? We'll go off a different dirt road here. Epistemology. When you when you try to figure out what things are most likely true or have the best evidence, what's your epistemology? How do you go about that?
That's too philosophical for me. I'm an experimental psychologist.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
I
always have
can
to do
I
that
can
to
design an experiment and to answer a particular question, and I know how to do it properly and how to analyze the data and how to make
yeah.
sense of it.
So
But
science, right?
that's a kind of question that Don Hoffman would be really good at, because
Oh, I asked him. Yeah,
yeah, he likes that kind of question.
yeah. I ask all my guests usually what is their epistemology, just because I'm a nerd, So no
Yeah,
offense on that one. um, I don't know if I have any more
but
specific.
not all your guests maybe are they may be nerds in their own way, but it may not be your way.
That's right, and that's okay. I want to meet nerds that are different than me and that are passionate about other things, so that I can learn from them. That's what I'm most interested in. I remember what I was going to ask you. You've done, obviously, going through psychology classes and everything. You've come across cognitive biases, no doubt. Have you done extra study on the memory cognitive biases, like at fundamental attribution error, stuff like that?
Well, that's a phenomenon in social psychology.
Mm, okay. Okay, I didn't know if that had anything to do with the cognitive biases.
Yeah.
So there's no cognitive biases that directly deal with like misremembering memories or anything.
Uh, w- uh, well, there are cognitive biases that come into play that particularly affect memory.
Right.
Um, so well, I'll give you an example,
Okay.
and this may be a new direction for us to
Please.
go into.
Please. Please.
I've had worked on many cases where people were accused of murder or robbery, or some crime, and maybe they were potentially misidentified, um, or in the case of the woman who was charged with murdering
Boyfriend.
her
Yeah.
boyfriend, was it self-defense, or was it, like the prosecution was trying to argue, a deliberate murder? Um, Sometimes, most of these people you've never heard of, but there are times when somebody very well known but very unpopular gets charged with a crime.
Mm.
And when I have worked on some of those court cases for unpopular people, um, it makes people mad. And I somehow people out there in the public forget that we are innocent till proven guilty,
We
that
are.
even unpopular people
Yeah.
like Harvey Weinstein,
Yeah.
or maybe you would put Bill Cosby into that
Yeah.
category now,
Yeah.
or Ghislaine Maxwell, I mean, deserve a defense. And if they're accused of something, even if they did some things, they didn't necessarily do everything that they're being accused of. But many people out there in the real world forget that, and they just get mad that anyone would try to help these people.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed is that when there is a lot of bad publicity about a person who becomes a defendant, it can affect people's memories for their prior interactions with that person. It can distort their memories in a direction that is consistent with this now bad label, bad person label that's been attached to the person.
Yeah.
So that's one kind of memory bias. And I'm sorry I took so long to explain
No, that's fine.
to you, but yeah, when people get labeled, a serial bad crime committer,
Right.
um, then suddenly it can contaminate the memory of people who had interactions with this person,
Yeah.
that might have been very different from the way
Yeah.
it's now being remembered.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting memory bias.
It is.
And I've just finished reading a study by an author named Carly, who did a really interesting experiment where two people are out on a date and they're having an interaction, and it's very detailed and so on.
Yeah.
But it ends, for some people, it ends well when he rapes her. And for other people, it ends when he proposes marriage to her.
Oof.
The ending affects the way people remember the story. So if they hear the rape ending, they start remembering all kinds of things about the story that weren't true but are consistent with a rape ending. And same thing with the marriage proposal ending. So this is an example of how the ending or some new information that you might learn about a
Change.
person and a situation
Yeah.
can contaminate your memory for what occurred earlier.
Yeah. And that probably in were there, I don't want to get too deep into these people's lives, but with the boyfriend case, was there a lot of witnesses?
That was an experiment, and so it was it was a short scenario about this interaction where these two people were on a date. That was not a real case. That
Oh, I
was
know. I'm sorry. I jumped
yeah,
back
that
on
was
the
a
tangent
that was an
about.
experiment.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I jumped back there too. Um, yeah, I probably shouldn't have tied that together. But in that case, just for my curiosity, were there eyewitnesses that gave testimony in that case?
Which you mean in what the
Of both.
woman who was accused of
Yeah, the
the
boyfriend.
murder of self? Yeah, that was yeah. I mean, a critical detail in that case was how much time passed between when she went into the other room and then there was a gunshot.
Ah,
Because if it was, how much time passed, and there were witnesses who had different memories of how much time passed.
yeah,
If it was a long period of time, it maybe was consistent with premeditated something or other. If it was a
right.
short period of time, it might have been consistent with self-defense. So, and again, that case is pretty old now, and so
Yeah.
I may be somewhat off on the facts, but
Well, that's
I
okay.
know that a critical detail was people's memory for how much time elapsed.
Yeah, and that's going to be the thing is, wow, it keeps slipping from me. I keep having this question come up and and then I lose it. That happens to me all the time. It's just ADD. uh, why is it well, I keep on framing these questions bad. Why is it so important to pay attention to the memories of people in eyewitness testimony if hmm I'm having trouble here. I'm so sorry.
Well, if it, if fault, yeah, for the most part, it doesn't. We make lots of memory mistakes, and they don't usually matter. It
Yeah,
really
that's what I
isn't.
was getting at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if I tell you I had, chicken last night and it was really a hamburger. It doesn't really matter very much. I don't get caught in the mistake. But when it comes to a legal case where somebody's freedom is at stake,
Yeah.
then very precise memory does matter a lot. And
I
that's
remember. I
why,
remember now. So
okay.
I remember now in that instance where she went to the other room and the gunshot was fired, that traumatic state of events, did that you think change her memory of what happened?
Well, it could, yes, it
Could have
could.
changed. Yeah.
But yeah, but in that particular case, yes, there would have been her testimony, but there were also other presumably neutral witnesses. I mean, people are gonna, probably assume that she's gonna distort her testimony in a way
Yeah.
that helps her case. But the other people who might be testifying for the prosecution, who are seemingly neutral witnesses, um, they can make mistakes, and usually it's the defense that wants to bring out scientific information to point out what the science says about memory under these circumstances and
Hmm.
help the jurors arrive at a better decision.
Yeah. And jury's memories matter too, but of course you can't get too deep into that when you're trying to focus on the actual case and the witnesses and things like that. Uh, but they go through pretty heavy jury um, what is that called, vetting most of the time.
The voir dire.
Did you follow that latest case with Nicholas Cruz, the shooter for the Stoneman Douglas High? Did you see that on TV?
Well, I saw a lot of news about it, but
Yeah.
in fact, I was in Florida at the day it happened.
Really? Were you
Yeah.
anywhere near it?
No, well, I was not, in the same city, but not. I was at my uncle's 100th birthday, a celebration.
The reason I ask about that is I always think, like, what if the memory of all the 30 or so people they had up on the stand up there was incorrect because they had one juror not to basically say, I can't say he's innocent or guilty. So, they couldn't do the death penalty because of that one juror. And just thinking about the memories of all the people, who testified, what could have been wrong about that, how that might have changed if it was, perfect testimony. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's just interesting to me how that can all play into someone's life, like the Innocence Project. Like, isn't that what it's called, the Innocence Project?
Yeah, the New York Project, yes, the Innocence Project. They have their own website, and you can find out information about all those cases.
Yeah, anybody watching, please go and check that out. But I know that they have other junks, not that yours is junk science, but they have junk science like that the Innocence Project has fought against, like bad DNA evidence. I'm assuming bad eyewitness testimony evidence. What's the other thing that they threw out? Oh yeah, the bite marks. You know how people could say that,
bite marks. Yeah.
Yeah, that was junk science. Do you know any other ones?
Well, there's a lot of controversy about matching bullets.
Yeah.
Did this bullet come from this gun?
Yes.
I gather, but I know that because I've got colleagues here at University of California, Irvine, who work on other kinds of problematic science.
I see.
I mean, even fingerprints are a matter of some subjectivity.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you too. How, I mean, like, really, how close can we be on fingerprints? DNA evidence.
Well, now there's another person for you to have on the show. My colleague Simon Cole wrote the book called Suspect. It's a Suspect Identity or something, and it's a skeptical view of fingerprints and why it's not as be all and end all as some people like to think.
Yeah,
he'd be a great person for you to
I think they should. I would love that. Simon Cole.
Professor at UC Irvine.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down real quick.
You write that down.
Okay, got that saved. All right, so now I have loved this conversation. We're at an hour. We're gonna ask Perry. Perry, are you with us? Do we have any callers? It's kind of in the middle of the day still for most people, so I don't know if we've got too many. Do we have anybody in the comments that wants to come up and ask any questions or anything? Yeah, I figured that would be the case in the afternoon.
Oh, no, it's okay. Well, it was fun talking to you.
It was fun. Thank you so much for educating me on this stuff because I love memory, but I need to study more about it from a
okay, well, help yourself to articles on my UCI website. You can just download them for free.
Oh, okay. Okay, on your UCI website?
On my UCI website.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody knows that now.
Okay.
If there's nothing else we can go over, I loved you so much as a guest. Thank you so much for coming on. You're more than welcome.
Pleasure.
Come back anytime you want, okay? And we're going to go ahead and end this bad boy now. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Bye-bye.